In 1944, Japanese civilians were jumping off cliffs to escape American soldiers. They were terrified of American Marines, which is kind of funny because the same Japan once thought Americans were the softest people on the planet. Americans were weak and individualistic, spiritually empty, no discipline. They're not willing to die for anything bigger than themselves. This is what Japanese thought about them. Japan had Bushido. America had jazz and cheeseburgers. So what changed? You're about to find out. This is the full story of how Japan created the fictional monster they feared most, and then couldn't destroy it even when they needed to. To understand the fear, you have to start with the arrogance, because Japan wasn't always afraid of America. For a long time, they genuinely weren't. Pre-war Japan was a society built around one idea: spirit beats material. Bushido, the warrior's code, said that willpower, discipline, and the willingness to die were the only things that actually mattered in a fight. Weapons were tools. Spirit was the weapon. And by that logic, America was a joke. Americans were rich, comfortable, and deeply attached to staying alive. Their soldiers went to war with enormous supply dumps full of food, cigarettes, and spare equipment. Japanese officers who saw American supply lines genuinely thought, these people are tourists. So Japan attacked Pearl Harbor with a very specific calculation behind it. Not, we will defeat America, but we will hit them so hard, so fast, and take so much territory that the soft, comfort-loving Americans will decide the whole thing isn't worth it and negotiate. The plan was never to win a long war. It was to make a long war sound worse than a deal. But American soldiers kept showing up, and they kept not dying on schedule. And the ships America lost at Pearl Harbor, the ones Japan photographed sinking into the harbor in triumph, started getting replaced. Fast. Unnervingly fast. And this was the first crack in the arrogance. Here's what Japan got wrong. They measured fighting spirit by willingness to die. Americans were, by Japanese standards, almost offensively reluctant to die. They called in artillery instead of charging. They retreated and came back with more people. They asked for air support. They were, by every samurai metric, doing it wrong. But they kept winning. And when the thing you built your entire military philosophy around, spirit beats material, starts producing a body count that only goes one direction, you have a problem. Not just a tactical problem, an existential one. Because if spirit doesn't beat material, what was any of this for? Japan didn't have an answer for that, so they built a different story instead. The story they built was this: Americans aren't winning because they're good soldiers. Americans are winning because they're animals. This is where the propaganda machine turned on at full power, and it was specific, deliberately, carefully specific. Not just Americans are bad, that's boring, nobody's scared of bad. The specific version was, American Marines are convicted criminals. They are recruited directly out of prison. To graduate boot camp, a Marine must kill a member of his own family. They collect the skulls of enemies as trophies. They eat prisoners. They are not soldiers. They are barely human. Now you might be sitting there thinking, nobody actually believes that. And you'd be wrong, because by 1943, Japan controlled every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every school, and every military briefing its population received. There was no competing information. There was no, well, actually, I heard differently. There was only the official version, delivered every day by every trusted authority figure in a person's life since before the war started. A Japanese schoolchild in 1942 is looking at a drawing on the classroom wall. The drawing shows an American Marine. He has been drawn with claws, fangs, a sack hanging off his belt, and inside the sack, human skulls. The teacher is very calm. The children are very quiet. This is not propaganda to them. This is just information about the enemy, who is coming. The reason this worked so well isn't because Japanese people were gullible, it's because the propaganda was engineered to be unfalsifiable. There was no way to check it, no American soldiers to meet, no prisoners to talk to, just the drawing on the wall and the teacher standing next to it and everyone around you nodding. By the time real Americans showed up, 3 years of that story was already living in people's bones, and one man in a helmet saying, "Please don't be scared," wasn't going to win against 3 years of claws and skull sacks. That's not irrationality. That's just how information works when one side controls all of it. By 1944, something had happened that nobody planned and nobody could stop. Japan and America had built a feedback loop, and it was eating people. Here's how the loop worked. Japanese soldiers, knowing they would be executed if captured, because that's what the propaganda said Americans did, started pretending to surrender. A soldier would put his hands up, walk toward American lines, and then detonate a grenade. American medics, unarmed, marked with red crosses, trying to treat wounded men, were killed this way, repeatedly. So American soldiers stopped trusting surrenders, stopped approaching wounded men without extreme caution. In some cases, stopped accepting surrender at all. Which, to every Japanese soldier and civilian watching, was proof. Proof that the Americans executed prisoners. Proof that the monster was real. Proof that surrender was death. So more soldiers fought to the last, more civilians refused capture. The behavior that the propaganda predicted started becoming the behavior that both sides actually performed, not because either side was evil, but because both sides were now operating inside a story that made every other option look fatal. A Marine medic is moving across a beach toward a wounded Japanese soldier. The soldier is alive. He's reaching into his coat. The medic knows what this probably is. He keeps walking anyway. He keeps walking because his job is to walk toward wounded people, and he has decided that's what he does. And somewhere under all the noise of 3 years of war, he still believes it's the right thing. The soldier detonates the grenade. The medic survives. He treats the next man differently. Nobody built this loop on purpose. Japan built a terrifying, fictional American. Real Americans responded to real attacks in the only way that made sense. Japanese soldiers saw that response as confirmation of their fiction. Real Americans responded to that confirmation by hardening further, round and round. By Okinawa in 1945, the loop had consumed an entire island, somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 civilians dead. Civilians. People caught between two armies and a story that had quietly removed all their good options years before the battle started. Japan eventually looked at what this loop was producing and decided to build an official military program around the same logic, institutionalized, named, and handed to teenagers with airplanes. That story goes somewhere almost impossible to explain with a straight face. That one deserves its own video. Now, back to where we left. Saipan. July 1944. The battle is over. America has won the island. The fighting is done. The Japanese military garrison has been destroyed. And now, and here's the part, the American Marines who just fought one of the most brutal island battles of the Pacific need to figure out what to do about the 20,000 Japanese civilians who have retreated to the northern tip of the island and are standing at 2 cliffs above the ocean, with total conviction, certain they are about to be tortured to death. These are not soldiers making a tactical decision. These are farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, parents. People who have spent the last 3 years being told by every trusted source in their lives exactly what Americans do to the people they capture. American commanders understand what is about to happen, and they try everything. Japanese-American interpreters positioned at the cliff tops, speaking the language natively, with the right tone and the right register, because the words matter less than who is saying them and how. Loudspeakers playing Japanese music from before the war, the kind that belongs to a world where none of this was happening. The reasoning being, monsters do not play your childhood songs at you through a speaker. This is a signal. Please read the signal. Leaflets dropped for aircraft. Japanese POWs brought in person to the cliff edge, living proof, standing right there, visibly unharmed, to say directly, "I was captured. I am alive. Look at me. You do not have to do this." One Marine has a card with phonetic Japanese phrases written on it by hand. He practiced. He is standing at the edge of Bonsai Cliff, reading carefully, "You will not be harmed. Please come down. I promise you." A woman is at the edge, holding a child. She looks at him. She looks at the water 100 feet below. She steps off. Thousands of civilians died at those cliffs across Saipan, Tinian, and Okinawa. The two cliffs on Saipan got new names after that week. Suicide Cliff. Not a single one of those people died from an American weapon. They died from a drawing on a classroom wall in 1942, from a calm teacher who stood next to it and never gave anyone a reason to question her, from 3 years of the same story delivered by every trusted voice in a person's life, with no competing signal strong enough to break through in the seconds it takes to make a final decision at the edge of a cliff. American soldiers wrote about it afterward in diaries and letters, with a quality of bewilderment that never resolved into anything cleaner. They had won. They were standing right there. They had the interpreters and the music and the living proof and the handwritten cards, and they could not make it stop. The propaganda worked exactly as designed. It just didn't come with an off switch. Because that's what happens when you build something that well and run it that long. It stops being a tool and starts being the truth. The cruelest part isn't that people jumped. It's that the men they jumped away from were genuinely trying to save them and will spend the rest of their lives knowing it didn't matter. If you made it this far, like and subscribe. It genuinely helps. And click the next one on your screen. See you there.